Welcome to the Guns and Gavel Show, where Arizona's self-defense and firearms attorney, Tim Forshey, weighs in on the delicate balance between the law and personal protection. Learn about the legalities and realities of self-defense as he dives deep to discuss firearms laws, legal use of force, concealed carry, and home defense training. The Guns and Gavel Show starts in 3, 2, 1.
Hi folks, Tim Forshey here again, and I've got a real treat for you today. One of my close friends who's an absolute subject expert in all things related to self-defense, John Correia, has agreed to join me today. I had some photographs of him in a safety deposit box, and I had to threaten, but I actually got him to take time out of his busy schedule and come down and talk to us today. So I want to share this. John, as you guys all know, is the host.
See those photographs.
You're not going to see him yet, pal. I got to squeeze you a little bit more. As all of you know, John is the host of one of the most popular YouTube channels out there, Active Self-Protection. He's been doing that for years and years, and it's rare that I bump into somebody in one of my CCW classes that's not a hard-charging fan of John's, and it's just such a treat for him to be here. So, John, I know it's corny as heck, but tell us a little bit about yourself. Everybody knows you from the channel, and they know what you do, but a lot of them don't know. I've gotten to know you over the last few years. I've had several meals with you. I consider you a close friend. Sure. And there's a lot about you that I just find so interesting and so unique that people wouldn't guess about you. So I know this is kind of weird to put you on the spot, but give us your bio.
Okay, so
you're meeting your fiance's dad for the first time. Tell us about yourself.
My wife is going to be so mad I'm meeting my fiance's dad. So yeah, I run Active Self-Protection, which is a self-defense and firearms training company based out of Phoenix, Arizona. If you've ever seen this face or heard this voice, it's because people send me real-life surveillance videos of defensive encounters that people have gotten into, and I do after-action reports on them. So armed robberies, carjackings, muggings, stabbings, home invasions, badge cams as well. We put out 10 of those every week on the big channel. We have a second channel, Active Self-Protection Extra, which Tim is on with us on the regular.
Lucky enough to be on there before, yeah.
And we do firearms training, handguns, shotguns, carbines. We do some gear reviews. We talk legal and moral self-defense every Friday. And do class reviews, those kinds of things on that channel. So before that, I've been doing this now solo. So ASP has been my only job since 2018, but I've run the company since 2011. In the midst there, it was a side hustle. So this whole thing started for me as a side hustle. Before that, I spent 14 years in the Phoenix area in vocational pastoral ministry. My formal education, I have a master's of divinity, which I got in 2006. Before that, my first real big, I was in retail management for a while I was in seminary. And then my first big boy job, I was a member of Uncle Sam's Canoe Club. I made hot water the hard way in the United States Navy. You can make an awful lot of it. The hard way to make hot water is to split atoms. And sounds really impressive. I was a nuclear reactor operator.
Also the easy way, I suppose.
Yeah, well,
once you get it set up, it works pretty well.
It's really not that hard. People think it's hard. You go, listen, wow, that sounds really impressive. Nah, I just watched a rock get hot. Hot rock makes hot water makes steam.
Yeah, for those of you guys out there that don't know it, the nuclear arm of the Navy is the elite. That's not the dopes, that's for sure. So yeah.
You got to have some brains. You don't have to have any common sense, but you do have to have some brains.
One thing I've always wondered, and I've had a lot of people ask me this, is how in the heck do you get access to all these videos? Are people sending them to you voluntarily? How do you vet them to make sure they're legit, they're not photoshopped, or they're not deep faked?
Well,
how do you do that?
So most of them are actually available on social media. The vast majority that we do are sent to us by fans. I have one of my employees who does nothing but clear inboxes for me. So we have a email address that people can send things to. Our Facebook page is inundated with people sending us links. I also get people send them to me, and they're generally available on social media. So then we go through and we validate via news stories and those things, which is why on the big channel you'll always see in the description, here are news stories related to the event. Here's where I got the raw video from this, and those things. Every once in a while you can't, but at this point, quite frankly, I can kind of sniff out what's right and what's wrong. And so you can kind of be like, wait a minute, put that calibrated thumb out there. Nope, that don't look right.
Wait, I don't think Kim Kardashian robbed a liquor store.
Yeah, exactly.
That? That doesn't make sense.
Probably not okay. So, and that's the vast majority of them, though we do now, we've started to see kind of more and more of people involved in those incidents that will send me an email and say, hey, John, I have this thing. It's nowhere in the universe. It's never been posted on social media. I'd love your thoughts on how I did because I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we get to watch it. Now, honestly, a bunch of those, I've had people send them to me, and I say, friend, I would delete this from every hard drive you've ever had. I would forget that you ever did it. I would ignore this, and please don't ever tell anyone but your attorney that this went down. And I've said that more times than
It's amazing how blissfully ignorant some of these people are about these things that can wind them up in jail. I've had people come in, and granted, you have attorney-client privilege when you speak to me, but some of the things that people blurt out, they have absolutely no idea that what they're admitting to is a serious crime.
Right.
And they just, which is one of the reasons that we're trying to do what we do, I think, is to help people with that. But
decrease those numbers.
Wow, yeah.
And then others are really excellent defensive,
yes.
Use of force, and to say, hey, wow, that's a great story. We'd love to. We have a podcast, so my friend Mike hosts our podcast, and so we ask those folks, if you've been in a real defensive encounter, especially if we've got it on the main channel, come and talk about your experience, because what we see on video is a subjective kind of analysis of it from a third perspective, but how you experienced it through your own eyes and in your own emotions is different. So, so we do that. We have, like I say, we have a podcast. We teach classes all over the country. I do a fair bit, depends on who you ask, how much is a fair bit of expert witness work as well, because I'm kind of the guy now that if you go, hey, how do real defensive gunfights go? They call me. So
well, you've got a database probably like nobody else, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's nothing else like that that exists.
So I'm sure, and I apologize, I haven't looked at the channel in a couple of weeks. Have you already covered this, the Correia shooting in Houston?
Yeah, we did.
Covered that. Do you mind covering it again for 40 seconds?
No, I don't mind at all.
Because I'm getting asked about it just nonstop. We're recording this, folks, in mid-February 2023, and the hot story right now in the self-defense market is this self-defense shooting, or was it, in a taco shop in Houston, Texas, sometime in the last few weeks. And I've not talked to John about this until right now, so I'm ambushing him, and his response will surprise me probably. Maybe it won't. I bet it won't.
A little bit of payback for me doing this to you.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even know I was going to do it until just now. But I'm going to summarize this, and you correct me when I'm wrong, but you've analyzed it frame by frame probably. I would characterize it this way. A young man comes into a taco shop. I didn't count, but I'm going to guesstimate somewhere around 10 to 12 patrons in the shop. Is that in the ballpark?
Yeah.
And holding a gun, as I recall, gangster style horizontally, which tells you something about the guy at that point as well, is holding everybody at gunpoint, robs the taqueria, and then starts robbing the individual customers of their watches and their wallets and their cash. And then he basically, after he's completed that task, he turns and he's exiting the diner, and then one of the patrons slides out of the bench and draws a concealed weapon and fires, I believe, 6 shots into the guy's back. So let's stop it there.
Actually,
is that accurate?
9.
Well, he fired 9, but there was a volley of 6 at first. Then he approached the guy and fired 3 more, didn't he?
4 and 1.
4, 4, and 1. I thought it was 6, 3, and 1. Okay, good enough. So
Yeah,
4, 4, and 1.
4 and 1.
So let's first talk about the first 4 shots. The guy's fleeing, and I've had so many people say, wait a minute, the guy's leaving. How can you possibly justify to shoot somebody in the back? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously, so I don't think he's necessarily leaving at that point. Okay, at that point, he's still pointing a gun at people.
I couldn't agree more.
He's still threatening them. The guy doesn't really slide out. He just draws his gun and goes to work on the guy. And I don't have any problem at all with the first 4 shots.
Me too.
That dude put the quarter in the jukebox, so he gets to dance to the song.
And I've had several students say, but the guy was leaving. And I'm like, well, clearly he's a man of upstanding character, and we can clearly trust him. I mean, he's obviously concluded his transaction. He's abided by the terms of the contract, so we can clearly trust him to leave without hurting anybody. I mean, that's nonsense, but people don't understand that that's nonsense.
Well, and I mean, my first bailiwick, I would rather us all be good moral people rather than just strictly legal.
Exactly, man.
You
Absolutely.
can do all kinds of stuff that's legal that ain't moral.
There's smart, there's moral, there's legal, maybe in that order, right?
Maybe in that order, right? Our politicians lead us in immoral but legal behavior. So, did I say that outside? Anyways, but then, is this guy, we ask the question from a moral perspective, is he right now in this moment a deadly threat to the people around him? Does he have the ability, the opportunity, and the manifested intent to do people harm that would likely put him in the hospital or kill him? In that moment, I believe the answer is yes.
I agree.
And
he could have easily pivoted and started wiping out witnesses in a heartbeat. So,
right.
Yeah.
And of course, every state in the union has a law about the defense of third parties that, some people are like, well, you can only shoot him if he's pointing the gun at you. That's not true.
At all.
If he's pointing the gun at somebody else, I can defend them as they could defend themselves in that situation. And so those first 4 shots, that first volley, no problem in the universe.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I think we're probably in accord on the second volley as well, but tell me about the next volley of 4.
Yeah,
which the guy's down now, as I recall, correct?
Yeah, he starts going down at least. So that first volley, gets the gun out, bang, 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 bang. Then he kind of steps out and up and sees him again, and the guy is either going down or on the ground, and bang, 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 puts 4 more in him there fairly quick and fairly close afterwards. In those ones, I would definitely say the tie goes to the runner. Like I'm
the same way. I've told people to say it's just nice to know that you and I are on the same page on this, because I'm like, look, I don't know that I would have fired that next volley, but I think with the right jury and the right attorney that knows how to teach the jury properly, I think that you could probably justify those 4, because as you said, if you have a reasonable doubt, you're supposed to side in favor of the defendant.
Right.
And I would have had a reasonable doubt.
Exactly.
Could he see something I couldn't see? What was he feeling, et cetera? So I would have given him the doubt there.
Or again, he's a not a highly trained person,
Right.
and he's been taught probably to focus on his front sight.
Right.
And so the fact of the matter is he's seeing the suspect in a blurriness. And again, so he's not a highly trained guy. He's not running a red dot. He's not, got hundreds of hours of firearms instruction. And so he's just looking at his front sight, steps up, still sees his front sight, and maybe he doesn't see yet that the gun is skittered out of the guy's hands.
That's what I was going to ask. So right after, or near the end of that second volley of shots, you can clearly see the gun that was in, I believe, the gentleman's left hand skitter across the ground there, the tile of the floor.
Right.
Then, as I recall, he takes a few steps to the left, picks the gun up, then walks over and delivers a coup de grace that I don't see how anybody could say is justified.
So there's an interesting bit here that the raw video that came out, we really had to search for the original. The original, of course, got chopped up by news stations and those things.
Sure.
But finally found the raw video that had been put out. But of course, in the raw, the audio and the video were not in sync. And so you can tell that, this is kind of what I do for a living, right? Is the first time that his gun recoils, it's later than that you hear the audio report of it. So what we had to do is go back and resync it. It's not hard to do. It's, you just line it up in a video editing software. Because when I first saw it, basically what had happened is that the audio had been kind of moved forward. So it went bang, and then the gun moved later.
Okay.
And so then that last shot looked to me like he had come up and he went to go reach for the gun, and his gun went off again. And I was like, oh, I bet you he had a negligent discharge. Then when you sync it up, though, he reached over, grabbed the gun, comes back, and puts one in the guy's head.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm his attorney, which I'm not an attorney.
Which is a good thing.
Yes, I'm not barred in any state. I've not been to law school. I'm not going to law school. But if I said in my analysis of that video, I said, if I'm his attorney, my argument to the district attorney is what he is doing there is abusing a corpse. And I don't think he's going to get away with that.
It's so funny you say that, because the conversation I had with a student in my class this past weekend, and I said there's a famous case that we read in law school about a woman who died during a gang rape.
Right.
And the question was, how could they tell when she died, and how could they prosecute somebody for rape when rape requires a live victim? And they ended up being able to successfully prosecute them only for bestiality. Oh, I'm sorry, for necrophilia. As horrible as that story is, it raises the same issue. How do you know the guy wasn't dead when you fired the last shot?
I mean, the Johnny Cochran defense is we insert a little bit of doubt, right?
Right.
That's what he did. I mean, let's be real. I mean, we all know OJ killed Nicole. I mean, there's no question about that, but that's not the question. It's, can we prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he did? No. And so if I'm his attorney, that's what
you focus on.
What else are you going to do? You've got him on camera, grabs the gun. I now have his means of doing deadly harm. So, and he's laying on the ground, so do I have manifested intent? No. Does the jury feel sorry for this guy? Also no. And so
what do you got left? Yeah.
It's interesting, in Texas, of course, every single homicide goes to a grand jury. It has to by law. And somebody said, oh man, that guy's in trouble. I said, man,
that's what Texas is famous, folks, for what we call the bastard needed killing defense.
Well,
and it's a matter of public attitude. Like you said, it has to go to a grand jury. If the grand jury decides, hey, guy wants to go in and rob a liquor store, or wants to go in and rob a taco store, and there's 12 armed people in Texas, by God, then he's going to get what he pays for.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if the grand jury no-billed him.
Yeah,
frankly.
I wouldn't either.
I wouldn't be surprised. Now, of course, so the crazy part of grand jury proceedings, right, is they're closed. And the defense, if there was one here, and there is, he's got a criminal defense attorney, gets to submit a report, but they don't get to participate.
That's right.
And so
sadly,
the prosecutor, it's a closed environment. The prosecutor makes their best case, and the grand jury says, is there probable cause here to proceed with a criminal trial?
The old saying is that a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich with a grand jury anytime they want to, because they present the evidence that they want, and that's that. So,
and they could also not get an indictment, but we don't know, did he really take an earnest swing at the evidence? Or, can the prosecutor look at the grand jury and say, here's the facts as we have them. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, it's your decision to make. But I think I'd have a really hard time at trial with this one, so I'd prefer we just not go through the trouble.
My understanding, there's one last issue, is that it wasn't a real gun. Is that correct? Is that your understanding as well?
It wasn't.
It looked real. So the ability is to, folks, when you say they have to have the ability to kill a human, it's actually the ability or the perceived ability. So a realistic looking fake gun would still give the perceived ability of lethal force. If it's a transparent green, translucent squirt gun dripping water, I doubt that's going to pass muster, but that looked like a real gun to me. So I guess I would say that's really not an issue. Would you agree?
I would agree. I mean, would a reasonable person believe that they had the ability to do deadly harm? So that's like, okay, I joke with people. So if somebody is approaching you with a knife and saying, I'm going to kill you, do they have that would you reasonably perceive that ability? I say it depends. Now, in a normal sense, for most people, yes. But now let's say it's your 85-year-old grandmother who's on a walker and she's got a knife in this hand and she goes, you come over here, I'm going to kill you, Dad, with her little bitty walker, and you're like, Grandma, put the knife down.
Yeah.
Then no, she doesn't have the ability, right? And so, in that case, though, certainly given what we see there, would a reasonable person perceive that he had that ability? Yes. I think his case is even more kind of difficult in that. So then the guy rifles through the deceased's pockets, takes all the money out that he's stolen from people, returns, basically hands it back, deals it back to everybody. How much money did he take from you? Oh, here's your cell phone, here's your wallet, here's your stuff.
This guy thinks he's Kevin Costner in Nottingham Forest.
No kidding.
At this point.
Then all the customers, now listen, all the customers leave. And then he decides, I'm out of here. And jumps in his truck and goes and doesn't call cops, doesn't do anything.
Again, we've talked about that before,
And listen, I understand why some people don't trust law enforcement. I understand why some people would not want to have contact with law enforcement. However, they definitely in this case want to have contact with you.
Well, and there's 16 witnesses and videotape. I mean, you think they're not going to figure this out? I mean, you probably paid for your food with a credit card. I mean, come on, you just be smart about this.
It's not like they're not going to. So I actually said, I put that one out pretty soon after it happened. And I told that guy, I said, look, I don't know if you know this man, or if sir, you're watching, what I want you to do right now is I want you to call an attorney. I want you to call an attorney right now, and you need to be sitting with a criminal defense attorney in your jurisdiction before you call the police. And in fact, you want your attorney to call the police for you at this point.
Now, are you saying this guy did contact you?
So no, I'm saying. So I said
you had that opportunity.
I put this video out on my YouTube channel, and I said, if you know this guy, or if he watches this, so come to find out that I found out a little bit later that he had contacted an attorney, and then did submit to questioning. So then the police were like, hey, we're not sure if he's committed a crime, and so hey, make sure your attorney is sitting there.
Yeah, no doubt.
You're sitting there, and your attorney is speaking
Hey guys,
words.
There's nothing magical about an attorney either. I mean, the attorney can't keep you from blurting something out. The purpose of the attorney is, I don't just show up at the interview with the cops. We're gonna conduct our own interview, which is confidential, and we're gonna go through it 50 times and make sure we understand exactly what the facts are, make sure we present those facts the way we want them presented, and then the attorney will be with you when you give that statement to the cops to kind of kick the rudder if need be. But there's nothing magical about an attorney that just magically makes you safe like a lot of people seem to think.
And of course, if you say to an attorney, well, yeah, I really did in my mind, I wanted to murder that guy, but what I'm going to do is lie to the cops. Of course, your attorney's going to say, I can't, no, you can't do that.
People don't understand that either. If you tell me, yeah, I murdered this guy, well, I can't tell anybody else you told me that, but I can no longer allow you to say anything other than that because that's suborning perjury.
Right.
And that's a crime for me and for you, and I'll lose my license to practice law and worse, and that's not allowable either. So you've got to be a smart consumer of these services as well.
And at the same time, that's when your attorney says, you don't have to answer questions.
That's correct.
You have a Fifth Amendment right.
for a reason. That's
and it
right.
exists, as Ron White said, I had the right to remain silent, but I didn't have the ability.
I've stolen that line so many times, yeah.
So you got to not be Ron White, right?
You got
to keep the ability.
In so many ways.
So I think, honestly, if this one goes to a jury, depends on the jury you get.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part is you never know what jury you're going to get.
That's correct.
And you might get a jury of people who say, nope, prison.
And you might, but again, don't forget, this has to be a unanimous verdict. And I always tell people, I don't have to convince 12 people that my client was right. I have to convince one that my client may have been right.
Right.
That's all it takes. That's a mistrial. A mistrial means they have to start over, and the state's not going to do that more than a couple of times, most likely. So, that's just it. Can I get one person on that jury that thinks, well, maybe he shouldn't have fired that last shot, but by God, that guy shouldn't have come in to rob a taco store either. And, my uncle got robbed like that, and he got pistol whipped, and he's never been the same since. And these people need to be off the streets and blah, blah. So this whole street justice vigilantism thing, as sad as that is to talk about, it exists, and you can't deny it. So.
Well, and there are jurisdictions that he needed killing.
Yeah, the bastard needed killing defense. Yeah.
Is an actual kind of thing, not to mention the fact that I know nobody likes to talk about it in a legal place, but jury nullification does exist.
You bet
that the jury stands not only over the facts, but over the law.
That's right.
And so the jury can say, this meets the requirements, but we refuse to convict.
And if they're smart enough, they don't point that out.
Yeah,
they just
never
they just
point
render
that
the
out.
verdict. Because
Right.
yeah. One of my favorites about what we're talking about right now is, and I know you do a lot of stuff in Latin America. You're very, very popular in Spanish as well. But I know it's my understanding that in Brazil, the machismo defense is still on the books in Brazil. So if a man, and it's very sexist, obviously, if a man catches his wife cheating on him in flagrant delicto, he can kill the offender and the wife.
Yes.
And that's a legitimate defense to manslaughter and murder charges in Brazil, which I always found to be quite interesting. They probably don't talk about that in the marriage vows, do they?
Yeah, they don't necessarily mention that in those. And again, if you did that in a court in America today, you certainly don't want to mention it in the jury room deliberating.
No,
and you
for
certainly don't want to mention it afterwards.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think these are the kinds of things where, we say be a good person, be a good, sane, sober, moral, and prudent person. And listen, those first 4 shots, I think you're in a must. I really need to shoot that guy.
Right.
He's going to put somebody in the hospital or kill somebody. The second 4 shots,
tough call.
you say, okay, so we go, can I, should I, must I?
Right.
All right, you probably can. That 9th shot,
Yeah. That's tough to justify. He might get away with it.
He might.
But that does not make it right.
He might. And if the prosecutor's mad about it and the grand jury no bills on the other ones, he could come back and say, I want a charge of desecrating a dead body.
Make the point.
I
right?
want a conviction, sucker.
So I had a guy in my class this past weekend, coincidentally, who was a just retired Secret Service agent. And one of the rare law enforcement people that I have in my class who actually revealed that fact. He didn't do it grandiose. He wasn't inappropriate about it. Really nice guy, very downspoken. But he came up during a break and talked to me. And then I said, would you be willing to mention that to the rest of the class perhaps? He said, sure. So we had him talk a little bit and stuff. But in the process of talking about that, we talked about the Secret Service, coincidentally, just about 2 weeks ago, released their National Threat Assessment Center report for, I want to say, like 2016 to 2020. Yeah. And they went through and they looked at what they're calling mass attacks, what a lot of people are calling mass shootings or mass public shootings, MPS. First of all, I think you and I have talked about this before. I absolutely hate that they call them mass shootings. I think that just drives me up the wall.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're going to try to find a phrase that correlates into these things. I think we use plenty of euphemisms, right? So I go to the range and shoot a lot all the time.
Right.
So when we say somebody went on a shooting spree, that sounds like they went to the store and bought things.
Right.
No, it's a killing rampage.
Right, exactly.
Is what we have. Let's call it what it is.
And I always tell people, I'm an active competitive shooter. I shoot IPSC and USPSA and 3-gun and blah, blah, blah. And I was at a mass shooting just a few weekends ago at our local shooting range at Rio Salado Sportsman's Club. And there were about 200 guys out there shooting a 3-gun match. And when I say guys, I'm including girls because I'm a jerk. But lots and lots of folks. And I saw smiles and hugs and embraces, and everybody had a great time and laughter, and everybody left, and it was completely safe and very, very courteous. That was a mass shooting, but yet I'm not sure why we've allowed the media and even our government to take the term shooting and somehow bastardize it and demonize it. We don't call it a mass driving when somebody drives into a crowd of people and kills them. Right. We don't call it a mass knifing when somebody attacks somebody with a machete. And I just wish we could sort of get that term back to some degree, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, there's terms like that,
like
assault weapons. And, and I mean, no, assault is a behavior, not a tool. And so I'd prefer we remove that. They're saying now assault style rifle, and no, an assault rifle has a very particular definition, and it's not a style. I
get a good result sometimes when I point out to them where that term came from, as you know, and then that sort of maybe then they feel a little bit more sheepish about it. So
yeah, I mean, and obviously, who do you give an assault rifle to? An assaulter, and who's an assaulter? Is somebody who is in a military unit whose job is to close with the enemy and destroy them and kill them and break their stuff. That's his job.
So now that I've ranted about my bias against the term mass shooting, let's go ahead and use the term they use, which was mass attacks, which I guess I like better. So apparently there were about 173 such attacks recorded during that 4-year period of time. Now I think that's probably way low, but let's remember they're defining this as 3 or more people who are never in the location of any of their residences. So it has to be away from home, 3 or more people. So anything that happens at home.
And I believe 3 or more people, not the shooter.
Correct, not including the shooter.
Who are killed.
So if we talk about, if we throw in attacks that happen in home, and if we talk about attacks that happen with less than 3 or 4 people, I think those numbers would dramatically increase. But let's use their numbers and let's see if we can gain some understanding from that. So out of those 173 attacks, they claim that 74% of the attackers had prior criminal records, and I believe that meant felony records from the way I read the report.
Sure.
41% of them had a history of domestic violence that was well documented. So convictions for domestic violence. I don't mean you got in an argument at a party and pushed somebody. I mean you were convicted of it. 50% had exhibited mental health symptoms, including psychoses and suicidal thoughts. And I was just interested, you've probably noticed like I do instantly, what do all those categories have in common? They disqualify you from being a legal owner of a firearm.
Sure.
So the vast majority of these perpetrators can't legally have guns in the first place. Does that surprise you in the least bit?
No, I mean, of course not. Obviously, I think one of the things that we see that the commonalities there is that we knew in advance that there was something wrong, right? Obviously, so as a society, we've already removed their right to keep and bear arms via due process, and I think due process is a thing. And of course, it doesn't stop the ones who want to go and do what they're going to do. You know, the deadliest mass attack in American history was done with fertilizer, and the second deadliest mass attack in America was done with airplanes. And so, you know, it doesn't require a firearm, though the ones that we're worried about on a regular basis involve firearms disproportionately. So, and again, it's almost never where these things happen and you know, the prototypical, well, he was such a nice boy and all his neighbors, we never had any problems, and it was, you know, he was always so nice and cut his grass perfectly, and he always, you know, helped old ladies across the street.
But those are always the serial killers, it seems.
Right.
Right? And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody who has a grandiose suicide plan.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, people never talk about that, but these mass murders that happen with guns, they're almost always suicidal. And obviously, one form of suicide is homicide, or better, I guess better put, one form of homicide is suicide. If only they do it in the other order. If they would just do suicide, homicide, it would be a lot better than when they do homicide, suicide.
Yeah,
you notice?
And I mean, don't get me wrong. Suicide has touched my family very, very personally, and so I don't joke around about that. Obviously, you know, homicidal urges are just as, or even worse in many cases. In these cases, especially than suicidal urges, and the number of suicides in America is a problem that we need to deal with, and the number of those with firearms is a problem that we need to deal with. But obviously, you know, folks who we know have violent tendencies, that we know have had problems, that most of these, you know, you look at recent ones we could think about in Buffalo in the supermarket, in Illinois at the 4th of July parade, at Uvalde in Texas. Literally all three of those killers, which I have a rule personally, I call it the some a-hole rule. I never mention them by name.
Their name. Amen.
May they die in ignominy.
Never mention their name.
But all had you know, significant contact with law enforcement. All had you know, and the neighbors were like, oh, we knew this was coming.
That's just it. That was the other thing that the study revealed, was that the vast majority of these involved the use of weapons. The vast majority of them were illegally possessed weapons. But even more than that, everybody's coworkers said, yeah, this guy always had a problem. This guy had all kinds of issues fitting in. He was exhibiting all kinds of symptoms of anger. He'd been evicted. He lost his job. He was having financial strains. There was all these, as they say, red flags. That term has been sort of bastardized in the last 5 years. But all these red flags are going up, and everybody just basically just kept on keeping on. And if there's a moral of this story, I guess it would be, for me at least, is if there's someone in your life, at your place of work, at your school, and they just make the hair stand up on the back of your head, pay attention to that. Listen to that. You know?
And I think the thing that we see is that, in my opinion, the vast majority of the time we actually do intervene. You know, but we don't hear about those. They don't make the national news.
That's true. You're right.
The number of times that the cops go and catch that guy, and okay, no, we're going to go do a 72-hour hold, and then no, we're going to get you some help, and we're going to get the social services here so that this doesn't happen. That's the vast majority, and it doesn't make the news.
That's true.
When they slip through the cracks, that's when it does.
And of course, it's just like with all self-defense. I mean, you don't hear about the 10,000 times last year that the privately owned CCW holders drew their weapon legally and threatened to use force and stop the incident. There was no bloodshed. Well, that's not newsworthy.
Yeah, it doesn't make the news.
It doesn't make the news. You never hear about those. That's right, yeah.
But they say that over 90% of defensive gun uses do not involve the discharge of the firearm.
Firearm's not fired, that's right.
That's a clue.
And 90% of the ones where it is fired with handguns, it's not fatal.
Right.
And again, somebody's wounded with a handgun in New York City, that doesn't make the news.
Doesn't make the news.
So that means literally you're down to 1% that might make the news,
And I think that we can all agree that given these commonalities that we see, you know, that we knew prohibited possessor on the radar of law enforcement. We know we've had problems before that we start saying, wait a minute, there are commonalities here. And I think that they speak to kind of some of the social structure of America today, that we say, well, we just got to, you know, ban guns or whatever. Good luck on inventing the firearm. It's just not going to happen. But to look and say, okay, wait a minute, how do we increase our access to social services? As somebody who fights for some beloved family and their access to mental health care services, I can tell you it's
difficult.
No, difficult is not the word. It is impossible. And to the place of, I mean, many nights of tears of fighting against the bureaucracy.
Correct me, but I think that the statistic that I've seen is that there are like only 10% of the beds that are available today that were available 30 years ago, despite the fact that the need for those beds has quadrupled.
Oh yeah, I
mean,
mean,
that sound about right?
The chances of, let's just say you had an acute inpatient need for suicide or homicidal ideologies. I have literally sat with a loved one in the emergency room for 5 full days waiting for a bed to come open.
Oh my gosh.
5 full days.
Wow.
Waiting for one bed anywhere within a 100-mile radius to come open. So, and of course, for most, if you're an adult, right, you're not on a hold at 5 days. Most can do 72 hours. 72 hours. I'm going to check myself out of this joint.
And those of you that know about mental health, and John's far more of an expert than I am, but I've dealt with several cases that involve this. It oftentimes takes mental health professionals a year, 2 years, 4 years to get your medications, the proper medications and the proper dosages. I mean, we don't going to be able to figure that out in 3 days.
We don't understand perfectly how the chemical system of the brain works, and so they call it a medical practice for a reason.
Yeah.
And every individual is so different. You know, you throw a dart and hope, well, this particular medication helps a lot of people with these problems. Yeah. We'll let it go for a month.
Right.
You know, we'll come back and talk to me in a week. We'll see how it's going. Another week. It's not doing very good. Well, let's try something else. Okay, well, that's not doing so great. Right. That's causing another side effect. So let's try this thing instead. And it's a hit and miss, trial and error.
And the error can be quite, unfortunately, horrible.
Yeah, and exactly. Unfortunately, especially in adolescence, right? So many of these that are perpetrated by, say under 25s, your brain chemistry and your frontal cortex isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old, and adolescent brain chemistry is even less understood. And one of the big things when you're loading, especially loading the categories of, say, like SSRIs and those. Now, listen, I'm neither a psychiatrist nor a psychologist. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm just somebody who has.
But you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express.
Well, and I this is something my family and I have dealt with a lot. Okay, so I have beyond a hobbyist level of interest here. Okay, so I'm an expert in the end user side. That one of the things when you're loading especially in the SSRI lines in teens especially, is impulse control. Yeah. And that impulsivity, they can just cycle so fast. Now, once they're loaded, that tends to decrease significantly, but it can be a very dangerous time.
Right, and that's, of course, we're talking about impulsive, homicidal, suicidal acts. Yeah.
And so many of these folks that commit these mass attacks, right, these mass killings, they have been on the radar, and so they were receiving mental health services, but then what we find almost universally is it's past tense. They were receiving mental health services, so they're not on their medications anymore. And so some, especially in the self-defense community, they blame the medications when the reality is the medication, for however long they were taking it, really helped.
A lot of people that are mentally ill will say, well, there were side effects. I didn't like the side effects. I was doing better, so I just went off the meds. Well,
very common.
What do you think is going to happen? Invariably, right? People go through that, it seems. So,
very common. Yeah. And so I really think that an overhaul of the mental health care system in America, and it's gonna take a whole bunch of money and a willingness to do that. But deinstitutionalization that started in the 1970s in America, it's like you said, I mean,
the pendulum is swung too far.
Well, today you want to get into a psychiatrist, hey man, we need some help. We need some chemical help here because we have a real significant acute problem. You're here in the Valley where we live, you're probably talking anywhere from a 5 to 8 week lead time for the first appointment.
It's an eternity if you're in anguish.
And now, okay, if you have health insurance, okay, those will usually be covered. A psychiatrist appointment will because they're a doctor, but most times the counseling that needs to go with it won't. And so a counselor, if you're like, okay, I want to get in and see a counselor, that's smart and good. Most insurance isn't going to cover a lot of that. When they do, it will be for a very limited time. If they don't, most of those counselors, you're talking $100 to $150 a session. Right. And if you're doing that weekly, so now you're saying, okay, we want you to put $500 to $800 in your budget for that, which for most Americans in a time of vast economic uncertainty it's just not tenable.
Not to mention, a lot of the people that are fighting those mental illnesses that need the help are probably unemployed or unemployable
underemployed.
Right now. So how are they supposed to do that? It's just it's got to be about resource allocation, and it seems like we just keep focusing on the items. Let's ban these so-called assault weapons.
Yeah.
Let's ban high-capacity magazines. Let's ban braces that are on guns, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much focus on that. I just haven't seen anything like that affect the crime rate in my lifetime. It just doesn't work. So I just don't understand how many times people have to fail at that before we realize we've got to reallocate our thought process and our resources here. I don't know. Hopefully
and find some things that we can do together.
How about this one? I think you and I have talked about this before. You mentioned earlier that you won't mention any of these people's names, and I could not agree more. I mean, infamy, ignominy, I couldn't agree more. What about if we made it a law? If we just made a national law tomorrow that there would have to be a media blackout on the image or the name of any of these perpetrators. And then people say, whoa, wait a minute. The First Amendment, Tim, you can't do that. The First Amendment's free speech. It's freedom of expression. We've got to be able, people have a right to that information. My response to that is always, but we do that now. We've done that for the last 70 years in this country with regard to juvenile offenders. We found a certain type of offender that we feel that releasing that information is more harmful than helpful. So we put a media blackout on revealing that information. And it seems to work just fine. Why can't we apply that to another very narrowly defined specific group of people and just say, you don't need to know that person's name. You don't need to see their manifesto that they posted online. You don't like that?
No, I hate it. I hate everything about it.
Well,
because government is always the problem. That's, in my opinion, more laws always suck. Yes, my libertarianism is coming out. My Ron Swansonism is coming out. Okay, fine. And I think we don't even need to do that. I think that, for instance, now the Associated Press a number of years ago decided that releasing the names of sexual assault victims was harmful to them.
Correct.
And so the AP standard now is we don't do that.
Right.
And it dried up like that. Didn't need a law, just done. I have strongly advocated for two rules, the some a-hole rule and the 72-hour rule. That for 72 hours we don't publicize. We say we had a big deal. It's going to take us 72 hours to figure out remotely what went down, so we'll report on it in 72 hours. That's my personal rule. And all it would take is, the AP.
Yeah.
We don't publicize. We don't publicize faces. We don't publicize names.
I guess you have more faith in today's media than I do, because when AP did that years ago, I think the media was a different environment than it is now. But,
well, and I mean, so you got to recognize it's up to us to do that, because the news media in particular, but media in general, they're just like us.
They reflect us, if nothing else.
They are us,
right?
And they are. I always say this when I was in the service, right? So I was in the Navy for 8 years, right? Every individual you met in the United States Navy was almost universally a good human, and almost universally trying hard to defend democracy and to do the things. The Navy as a whole, this big faceless bureaucracy, was maddening and terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, just horrible to deal with. And so the media, right? Every individual in that, I know several reporters.
Sure.
Great humans.
Yeah, of course.
Great humans, doing their very best. But the bureaucracy.
Well, and have you noticed how we always say the government? And we forget that the government is comprised of people just like me and you. I have several friends who are involved in the government. I have a couple of friends that I would say are friends that are politicians. I have a lot of friends that are federal agents. But we always talk about this nefarious, the government.
Right.
But it's the same concept. Yeah, they're good people.
I was at SHOT Show in January. The ATF had a booth.
Yeah.
I went by there to encourage those poor souls, because those poor guys, it had to be a punishment.
They were getting gum spat out all day.
It had to be a punishment. But you know what the reality was? I went up, talked to several of them, good people, right? Doing a good work. And the people that were talking with them, they were like, we get it. People are frustrated. This brace thing's going on. Let's talk about it. So again, the difference between the individuals and that. And the reality is, if you want to, straight truth, we control the media.
What is consumption? Is that what you mean by consumption?
Yes.
Yeah, right, exactly.
How does the media decide what goes on the show? It's what will bring
we watch. That's right.
Clicks and views.
That's right.
Okay, so if you click it in social media, you are training them.
All right, so I guess we're telling all of you guys, stop doing that. Stop gobbling up these people's names and information like that.
That's 100% true.
It just gives them what they're seeking. It gives them infamy.
And it makes the media it makes them ratings, and that makes them dollars, because that sets their advertising rates. That makes them click-through rates and those things based on the titles, based on the descriptions, based on the pictures. And so, straight truth, if you don't click it,
it will go away.
It will go away. and so I mean that 100%. Yeah. Who controls it? We do. So you might say, well, we make a law, then they can't. I would prefer, I don't need your law. I will just not click it. And I'm not going to propagate it. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to say, we might say, hey, here's some things that this particular killer that we know that they...
Yeah, if we can learn from them, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
If we can learn from them, if we can make society safer by looking what they did and how they did, I'm all for that.
Right.
But I just don't want to give them the post-mortem publicity that they were obviously seeking.
Yeah, like
so many of them.
You know, the cutout on screen, right? Like, you know,
Right.
so this person, and
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you anything about them
Right.
as a person. I don't want to dehumanize, but at the same time, because those folks all have a story too.
Sure.
You know, they all have a story, but I'm not going to give the next guy the notoriety, because many of them now, you know, this goes back to Columbine when those murderers said, we want to be famous, and they got it.
Well, and the Virginia Tech shooter, whose name we both know,
Yeah.
I mean, he literally put a manifesto online, and then the media very happily just went ahead and broadcast the entire, you know, the whole thing.
The Oklahoma, fertilizer bomb murderer,
Yeah, he did the
wants
same
to be
thing.
famous.
Yep,
You know,
right.
wants to make a point and wants his manifesto read and
Right.
wants people to get his point. And who gets to deny that? We do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about him. So I'm a bigger fan of that. So that's the same
I
thing.
like that. And you know, you and I have had that conversation. I always think of myself as a libertarian, but you live it. You walk the walk and talk the
try
talk. So-
to. I mean-
no, you do. You're much better at it than I am, and I appreciate that. I really do. So.
It's the same thing when you say, wait a minute, you know, the vast majority of criminals acquire illegal firearms out of unlocked cars. That's where they get guns. They get them out of unlocked vehicles.
Well, that's part of the study as well. It said that I think 6% of the weapons used in these mass attacks were actually legally owned weapons.
Right.
The rest were stolen, and that always makes me feel better. It makes me feel like, well, see, the good guys are not part of the problem. It's the bad guys that are caught. But how did they get those guns?
How did they get the guns?
I always tell people, if I just got out on parole and I want a gun, I'm going to hang out in front of the Walmart, wait for the first F-150 to pull in with an NRA bumper sticker on it, smash the window, and grab the Glock out of the glove box. It couldn't be easier.
Chances are good you won't have to smash the window.
That's
Try
true,
the door.
Yeah, no doubt, right?
Just try the door.
So we make it way too easy for these people, and we've got to stop doing that. I mean, if you're a responsible gun owner, that means you purchase your gun responsibly, you train how to use it, you use it responsibly. You've also got to store it responsibly, because spend the extra $200 on a safe. It doesn't have to be Fort Knox type stuff. You're not going to have Tom Cruise lowering down on wires to break into your house. Just lock it up, and that would probably put a huge dent in the availability of illegal weapons.
100%.
Yeah, big on that.
And again, so who's responsible for that? Well, there ought to be a law. No, there ought to be on us to say, I don't leave guns in cars.
Right.
If, God forbid, I do have to leave a gun in the car, I have a lockbox for that gun that is hardwired to the car, not just sitting there.
Yeah, it's bolted down.
It's bolted to the car, and then that way, that, you know, again, when somebody pops the door, they're generally not looking for a gun, they're looking for valuables.
Whatever
but a
they can
gun
get.
is a valuable.
Very easily sold valuable. That's
And
right.
so they toss your car real quick. If they grab this box and they start to yank it and it won't go, okay, fine, forget it.
That's the number that I've heard is that the average car burglary lasts less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So they're going to check the glove box, the console, like you just said. If it's locked, they're going to move on. They're not going to stay
Toss
there
the back
because
seat.
somebody's watching them. They're on video, et cetera. So yeah, and it doesn't have to be some extremely expensive $1,000 custom installation. You can take drywall screws and screw just about anything down to the floorboards underneath your seat. It's not that big a deal to secure these things.
The one that I have in my pickup that almost never gets used because I don't leave guns in my pickup, it cost me $100. It's biometric and it's anchored to the car.
Yeah, there you go.
$100 on Amazon.
Want to cover one last topic and I'll let you get out of here because I know you got things to do too. So let's talk about, I mean, I've been a concealed carry instructor for going on, 29 years, I think, something like that.
Tim, I hate to tell you that you're old, friend.
I am, well, and that's weird because I'm 37. I keep looking at myself and like, who's this guy in the mirror, for God's sake?
That's what I keep looking in the mirror. Look at all this gray.
fat
And I'm like,
Santa Claus guy. What's going on?
Who's that old guy?
But I've been doing it for a long time, and I think it's incredibly important and incredibly valuable that people learn the laws of self-defense. They learn the common sense background for self-defense, but just the whole concept of CCW. We're seeing a huge sweep across the country of constitutional carry.
Love it.
We now have 25. We're soon to have 26. I believe Florida is slated to possibly sign this week. I think Oklahoma and one other state are talking about doing it in the near future. So very shortly, I think we're going to have, we now have, I mean, well, I guess right now it's exactly 50-50, but very soon we'll have the majority of the American states will have constitutional carry where a permit is not required. How do you feel about, because you can carry a gun without a permit, going ahead and going out and carrying a gun?
Well,
What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm of two minds.
As am I. Thank you.
Now,
I feel like I'm a hypocrite about it.
Not two minds of should it be okay.
I agree
see
with you.
all
Okay.
the time. I see people that are completely untrained with firearms, use them to defend their life, and they're functionally no more than a rattlesnake rattle.
Right.
That they draw a gun from wherever they had, and they're basically desk popping, right? Just shooting wildly. Pew, 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 pew. Ah, I'm scared. Leave me alone. Go away. And it works.
It dissuades people.
It drives bad guys
Also,
off.
there's a lot of luck there.
Well,
did
thank
anybody else
God.
get shot with a straight
Small
round,
bullets,
et cetera?
big world.
Right.
We recently had a badge cam on the channel that Buffalo police fired over 200 rounds into the general public and hit the bad guy twice.
Wow.
So there's 198 rounds unaccounted for, well, except for 2 other rounds hit 2 police officers. So now 196 rounds are unaccounted for at least. Big world, small bullets.
Yeah.
And that's not a good defense. So that said, I see untrained people defend themselves with firearms all the time. I see untrained people that effectively defend themselves with firearms, and so I am, as a matter of principle, all for constitutional carry.
I am too.
That I think the mere presence, and the other part of that is the statistic that says that fewer than 10% of defensive gun uses involve the actual discharge of the firearm. The mere presence of the firearm is where it should be. Okay, cool. So I'm all for it. Now, that said,
you're a firearms trainer as well.
I am an instructor. I'm a master instructor, and I love to teach firearms skills. So I tell folks all the time, why do I carry a gun? Well, and people say, well, to defend myself against crime, blah, blah, blah. No, more simple than that. I carry a gun because I might have to shoot someone today. And if I have to shoot someone today, I need to be good at it.
That's true.
Because I don't want to endanger anyone else. Because I'm responsible for that. And not only legally responsible for that, but morally, emotionally, mentally, spiritually responsible for that. And so I want to train to be good with it. Now, I'm a training junkie. I like gun school. Gun school is fun.
Well, I never had more fun than most of those classes I take.
Not everybody has to be that. But to have some training, very important, especially in this day and age where we put out great resources like you have. Great resources. There are several YouTube channels that you can learn legal and moral self-defense from the comfort of your own home.
Right.
And I think that it's your responsibility then.
That's just it. I like you. I think constitutional carry is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think you shouldn't have to ask the state permission to exercise a constitutional right. I think that's huge. But the analogy I always use, and this may be flawed, tell me when you think it is that everybody that's watching this video has the right to swing by a Home Depot and buy a chainsaw.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Doesn't mean it's a good idea for you to own one.
So I agree with you. Most of the time, you're not going to have to shoot it, et cetera. That's all true, but you've got to prepare for that small fraction of the percentage of time when you might need to. And my daughter is across the street in that apartment building that you're in front of. So I think we owe it to ourselves, to our fellow members of society, that at least a modicum of training. I always tell people, you don't have to be capable of winning the Indy 500 to be able to safely drive your car to a hospital. But you do need to know where the gear shift is and how the turn signal works and how the accelerator works.
So it's actually an analogy that I use all the time. I say, okay, so somebody gets a driver's license, right? They go through the rigmarole wherever they are and they get a driver's license. We generally allow that in most places at 16 years old.
Right.
Okay. So they do that. Are they now a safe driver?
Right. Exactly. Well, the state says they are.
No, God, the most dangerous drivers on earth.
Well, then you get to the people above 85 as well. But
okay.
That's,
But these are your most dangerous times.
Correct.
Okay, so what is it that makes them a safe driver?
Experience
driving.
That's right.
Right? So it's not the card. The card, and you say, well, at least they have some minimum. No, that doesn't help.
Right.
That doesn't make them safe. It's their responsibility to do that.
Right.
But it doesn't make them safe.
But it's the appearance of safety. It's the certification by the state that says you've met a minimum competent requirement test. I always tell people, I agree, but I always tell people, I use this analogy. Do you all have a friend who's 42 years old who has a valid driver's license who you would not ride in a car with on a $1,000 bet?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then do you all have a friend who grew up like I did in a small rural community where we were driving hay wagons to town behind our pickup trucks at age 14 and waving at the sheriff on the way and everything was fine with it? Again, so it's this competent certification that the state is bestowing, which, as you point out, really doesn't mean a dang thing.
Well, whenever the state takes a right away from you and then sells it back to you via a permit, they've infringed on your rights.
Amen. There's a libertarian, folks.
Here's my libertarianism talking about why driver's licenses are no good. But same thing with constitutional carry. Now, that said, I maintain my Arizona concealed carry permit because it gives me 37 states of reciprocity. It lets me bypass the NICS system because I've already been background checked when I go to buy a firearm.
Bars and restaurants,
parks,
parks,
those things,
Navajo reservation, a bunch of other stuff that opens up. That's right.
Yeah. And so I maintain it for that. In fact, I've argued with the powers that be, we're in the process of beginning not just Arizona's CCW, but an enhanced permit.
That's what we've been talking about that. I'm on the Arizona State Rifle and Pistol Association. We've been trying to get an enhanced CCW permit for years that will allow us possibly to carry in schools if we can get that law tweaked right. That would be so smart.
A high-level permit.
Same level of testing as a police officer.
I say that we led the nation in concealed carry. We were the first modern state to enact CCW permitting. We were then the first modern state to enact constitutional carry. We should be the nation leading in an enhanced permit.
We can set an example.
We can set an example, and I think we should. So, and I think to wrap that up, I think that constitutional carry is great, but you have the responsibility to be competent. Now, of course, most men, unfortunately, they're raised thinking they are capable of doing 4 things without any training, and firearms use is one of them, and that's not true.
Would you agree with me that the absolute worst student that we ever have to deal with is a 55-year-old male who has been shooting for 45 years, and by God, yes, he's going to keep his finger on the trigger, and you're not going to tell him different.
Yeah, or my dad was a cop, and he taught me to shoot.
There you
and,
go.
you know, those are the hard ones.
Give me a 20-year-old person that's never picked up a gun before. That's the ideal student, as far as I'm concerned.
I will say, though, that generally, those folks, if they start to, get that way, I just say, hey, let's go watch 5 or 10 videos on the main channel and see 5 or 10 gunfights and how they really go.
Yeah.
Are you up to this task? And then they kind of go, well, I think so.
Maybe there is something you can teach me.
Let's work on this. Let's work on this one skill set, and hopefully you never need it.
John, I mean, I can't thank you enough for coming in here today.
Yeah,
I know
man.
you got a lot of things going on in your life. It really is. It's a treat, and it means a lot to me. And all I can say is thank you. Thanks on behalf of the folks watching this, and thank you for me as well.
I always appreciate the time. I think that it's fun. Somebody who gets it, who's, I mean, so much more than I am, right? I just like to talk about that, a judge and a defense attorney and a former prosecutor and all these things, who's seen the system so much, and that it's always fun to bounce ideas off a guy with your stature.
Well, same here. I learn something every single time I talk to you, even if it's just lunch. I learned something from you. So thanks again, man. Appreciate it. Great to see you.
And that wraps up another episode of Guns and Gavels. Join us next time to learn more about the legal use of force, personal protection, and firearms training. Show your support and hit the like and subscribe buttons to make sure you never miss an episode. Till next time, stay safe.